Okay. All right.
You got this.
Yes. Thank you. So this will be the very first time I'm doing this. So for especially this particular conversation, but I volunteer at a nonprofit called Speak High. For the last 1 year, I've been part of this team and helping them develop a SaaS platform that they had been trying for multiple years at this point to put something out there that would enable them to do their mission purposes without needing specific custom tools that they were either very expensive or too tedious to use, and there was a bunch of scaling problems that they were trying to solve. So I feel like I should explain this a little bit. The sentence is a little intense, but say you wanted to be in law, right? If you wanted to go into web performance or law, and your family worked in retail or they worked in medicine, and there's nobody around you to give you the guidance or the advice as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, to advise you as to which colleges you can go to, where to apply, what are your options. Those are the factors that often decide whether or not a student is successful at the end of their 4-year college degree or where they're applying in the first place. Speak High's mission is to put those young adults in the age group between 12 to 19, put them in touch with working professionals in career choices that they want to be in, and perhaps mentor them into a better place where they are able to make more optimal career choices. So that's fundamentally the mission that they've been trying to solve. And in the process, they've gone through a lot of variations. This is their 10th year. In about 2 weeks, they'll be about 10 years old. And they had a few ideas that they were trying to move. So the talk is pretty straightforward as to why they went for a nonprofit, a SaaS route, despite being a nonprofit. Nonprofits have a lot of limitations that most other companies do not. One is that funding profitability is not a question, which means that all funding is devoted by donations and volunteers. So you're often looking to figure out how to do this on the cheap, which you can get from a lot of other places, but we've found a few workarounds to some of these things. We'll talk about that. They did build the SaaS platform, as I mentioned. They've been building it from 2021, but a lot of things had started to go wrong around 2024 when I joined. And we talk about how we identified those issues, how we iterated through those performance improvements, how to make it better, and what we are planning to do in the future. So with that, it's nice to meet you. I came to the US about 2 years ago. ChatGPT gave me a major existential crisis, and I said, okay, time to go back to school, and I went to get my master's degree. And last year, they received a grant from my university. And the Speak High received a grant from the university, and they said that if I could help them build what they were trying to do, I might have a place here. So I said, okay, let's do that. And honestly, the lectures were rather boring. So I substituted classroom classes with meetups, which I went to a lot of for 2 years, and met a lot of interesting people, including half the people I've met in this room, and then contributed to this over the last 1 year. So SaaS for nonprofits. This is what they had been using. Out of this, the most interesting item is the Kintone. This is a South Korean data entry platform, very similar to Airtable, what is today Airtable. Now, if you don't know what Airtable is, it's like this Excel/database management combined with automation suites that they had built into the system. And they had reached a point where none of this was feasible for them in the future. One person was managing all of this. But they had seen interest in outside of the New York City area, and they had seen interest in Philly, Chicago, Texas, and they wanted to scale. But if one person was going to manage all of this, it was going to be very difficult for them to do. This was a physical thing. COVID had just come in, so they were trying to move everything into a digital platform. So they tried that, and they thought, maybe we could try something that's not this slow or this error prone, which it was. All their attendance sheets were filled in repetitively on sheets. There was a lot of errors, a lot of back and forth. When you're speaking to public schools in the US, all turnaround time, it takes about 6 to 8 months. So if you make one mistake, or if there is a problem with the billing, everything takes that much longer to convert. So they needed a better system. This is what that Kintone system used to look like. And they're trying to deprecate it, but they still keep coming back to it. More on that later. So this is what they chose in May of 2021. It's that they wanted to build a bespoke SaaS solution. They wanted a general access platform. Right now, instead of one person, they wanted all participating parties, the students, the school representatives, the staff, the volunteers, all to be able to join on one singular platform. But because we are dealing with underage kids, we needed to make sure a much more compliant system. In the US, there are two specific laws that cater to this. FERPA, which is for educational data, and COPPA, which is for minors data. Most of that revolves around PII. So they wanted to build something that could account for this and allow everybody to come to one common platform. It's also the reason why most social media sites don't allow kids under 13 to open up accounts. And Instagram has like an Instagram Kids application that's completely separate. They wanted automation of processes. So one of the things that we do is that we have a very large database of volunteers. And what we do is that we put the appropriate volunteer, who are all working professionals, in touch with the right students. That process is called matching. It's currently very manually driven, is run in that Kintone system, but you have to do a lot of checks. And it's very manual, it's very slow, it takes a lot of time to work on. So they've only been able to do one program that involves this matching process in a year. When I say one, it involves 3 rounds over 3 semesters of the school year. Reporting and management, same problem. We need something that the school could access and report on directly to their districts, and they wanted something that could scale. It would look like dashboards. Fundamentally, that's what it was. It was just dashboards. They wanted reporting and management dashboards. This was the idea, and they used Azure for this, which was the first time I'd encountered Azure platform solutions. But they kept they had a very interesting decision in the first time was to use platform solutions and not VM solutions. So they didn't go as far as saying that we will control the entire cluster, we'll run it on Kubernetes and Docker, none of that. They ran it on these platform solutions, and it was a little more easier, and Azure offers a lot more feature capability than AWS does, which is very strange for me to note. And they had a decent idea, and you could combine that with the Typeform API, with Auth0 and Strapi for CMSs. They had a good idea. I would say that they had a good idea. Fundamentally, theoretically, this should have worked. But 2 years in, when I joined, I was facing this. This is a React application. When you say that a page is slow to load, that when you go from one state to another, that the page is slow to load, something's gone terribly wrong. There were a lot of frequent crashes. The very first day I joined, they were trying to sign up students to the platform, and the application would crash. And their solution to a lot of these problems was to just wait, because they had not accounted for async logins. And every login, if 2 people try to log in at the same time, it would fail. Oh. And there were a few of these issues that I was seeing, and that list kept going on and on and on. And so, first thing I did, this is actually a much more improved performance output from the test, and this is a more recent one. But there was a time when this value was 9. I've never seen 9 before on anything. And I'm like, okay, we have some work to do. So I decided that I would use this, and because I was part of this very nice web performance meetup, I had a lot of new resources to try and play around with. So I did exactly that. But before that, I had to understand the scope of the problem. This is a bundle analysis of what the application used to look like. What you don't see here is that there are duplicates. This team has gone through several cycles, wherein the entire engineering team has been replaced thrice. And the first team did a decent enough job. The second and third team probably didn't understand what the first team did, and they tried to build over them. The result of that was they were duplicates. They used the Material UI library for a lot of their initial component building, which was fine. It's a very large, very heavy library, not an issue. But then they built over it and then they duplicated it thrice. So the same component, the same form field existed in the application in 3 different varieties. It had 1 line of change. The difference between 2 components was 1 line of change. No idea why those duplicates existed. The commit messages weren't there. There was no code documentation. There was no business documentation. So there was a lot of more work to be done than just performance, but fixing the performance issues would have given me some understanding of what it is that they were trying to do, because everybody was struggling to explain what this platform was supposed to do. This is a more nuanced view, as you see select form fields, form lacks select fields, all different components. All of them do the exact same thing. 99% code similarity, and it made no sense. So this is where we started. We started with simple things. The very first talk I attended was from Paul, who explained about how fonts could be optimized, and that was the very first thing I did. Self-hosted it. And that was an easy fix that immediately made sure that our pages would load. The font display swap made a lot more difference in the way pages rendered, because it no longer looked weird. And we had originally done this via Nginx server. I'll talk about it in the next slide, but they had an Nginx implementation that was only doing reverse proxying. But Nginx is capable of a lot more. And I decided to use Nginx as an experimentation platform, because any costs that we would take as a nonprofit had to be explained to the board. For us to get money for it, we needed to apply for grants. We need to apply for any free options that we could gauge. There was a lot of these experiments, I would say, that we had to try to make a case that this was an absolute need. The CDN server actually got integrated 2 months ago. Before that, we didn't have one. We were using Nginx almost exclusively, because we needed to make the case that we need to go and receive a grant from Azure for all of this. Then we tried compression. Again, this is what we did on Nginx, and I tried a variety of options to try and make this work. I tried to work broadly compression work. It didn't work. I don't know. I kept getting it wrong. I tried using ChatGPT. None of them worked out very well for me. So I stuck to GSys because this I understood to a fair degree. And because our users were still mostly based out of the New York City area, it served for quite some time. And we still use Nginx. We've moved on, obviously, to Azure Front Door for the CDN. And CDNs have automatically broadly compression attached to them, so that was easy. But we still use Nginx for security headers and rate limits. So it still works out for us, but we've just toned it down. The Nginx config was a 200-line script at one point. Now I think it's just about a 40, 50-line script. This was a more interesting thing. The platform solutions, they had not optimized on everything that the platform could offer. Azure Web Services offered HTTP version 2.0 out of the box. And the moment we got the grant, the very first thing I did was turn all of this on, turned off session affinity, turned on session affinity, and made sure that the application was always on. I no longer needed to worry about the costs. All of this combined brought up our billing to $63 a month. And I considered that a win, because even I had started, it was 140. And then we brought it down further. We changed the app service plans, we changed the CPU constraints. We moved around a lot of things until we brought it down to a $60 max. And then we started making the case for adding more services and paying for a little bit more, as long as the grant would support it. The grant right now is fairly substantial, so we're kind of happy that Azure gave it to us. So we can be a little more happy, little more free to make changes to the system. This was the other thing, the duplicates that we saw. I added linter rules because a big chunk of the team are volunteers. They're mostly college students. It's very easy to make mistakes. So there were people who had imported the entire icons material pack on their pages. Like, nope, don't do that. So we added linter warnings to a lot of this is actually not the entire set of linter rules that we established, but there were more. But this was the most important thing that we started to do, make sure that everybody got error messages, and then our builds I made sure that the builds would fail if the linting rules failed on especially these. Then there was all the other smaller things. Adding heights and widths, fixed heights and widths. They prevented layout shifts. We added in suspense in appropriate locations. Graphs are very heavy. So if you don't add suspense to graphs, pages are slow to load. RTK Query Kit. Has anybody worked with RTK Query Kit before? Yes. RTK Query Kit has a caching mechanism that's very powerful, but only if you use it correctly. One of the problems that we encountered was that they had used the same value for caching. The caching value was the same for all the API endpoints. So we made a giant, and they had 60 endpoints, which means that if they invalidated once, the next time you came back to the page, it would pull back, it would call the API again. And that made no sense. So we fixed those gaps. We added in all the caching values. There was no form control. This just broke me. The fact that there was no form control meant that the API was getting calls that were not validated, and that the API was saving data that was not supposed to be saved, and the whole thing would come crashing down multiple times a day. So for the forms, we assigned one person. Just one person did form control the entire time. He would come here, he would come into the office after class, he would do 4 hours of form control, and he would leave. That's all he did. Form control and error handling. He got very good at it towards the end, and I'm very proud of him. But the fact that we had to add form control to the entire application, which was just mostly data capture, forms, attendance sheets, background information, phone numbers, address details. Nothing was captured, nothing was being validated, and there was a lot of data that was being just thrown out. And yes, we got rid of a lot of the duplicates, because they built a dashboard that fundamentally had the same UI. So there's a graph, attendance sheets, engagement metrics, who did you meet, when did you meet, what reports do you have to give, what feedback did the others give you. We had to send these reports out because that was what the school expected. But they had built, so they run, I think, 11 different programs right now. Your SpeakHigh runs about 11 different programs. This, in conjunction with the school, it's an after-school program of sorts, where we come to the school, we talk to the kids, we find out what they want to do, how they want to do it, we teach them the right tools, how to write the proper essay, and so on and so forth, like how to properly choose your career paths. But instead of making one page with a standardized API, they had made 12 pages, and each of those 12 pages had a variation. In fact, they had gone so far as to making a page that was specific to the ID of the program. So if the program ID was 1, it had its own page. If the program ID was 2, it had its own page. I don't believe that a lot of the problems that the platform encountered was because of incompetence. I believe it was because they had good intentions but not the right goals. That they all wanted to build a SaaS platform, but not a SaaS platform that functioned. And then when we fixed the API, when we fixed the performance issues, and when we fixed all of these small problems, suddenly we started to get a lot more results out of the platform, and it started to get usable. We brought on the first 50 users in January of this month. And we said, all right, we can make this work. And we've now decided to figure out how to apply those few lessons to the future. We had a public site that was hosted on Squarespace. And it was too old. We needed a new mechanism, something that allowed us to have a CRM level capture where we could post forms, surveys, send out newsletters, send out emails, have a much more robust public system, especially for donations, which we needed to create our entire pipelines for funding and donation matching and a lot of other outreach programs. So we did that, and we ended up with this. This was much more better with this. And we fixed the bigger problem that this application had. server-side rendering, which a React application cannot do. I tried server-side rendering on my own on the internal site, and a couple of sleepless nights, and then I said no. And this has led to new challenges. So this one is actually leveraging the content management system that we created. This is another thing that we had to learn. SaaS platforms, when you have to subscribe to them, can get expensive very quickly, very fast. So we needed a content management system that was either A, something that we could manage, or B, something that was free. We decided on something that was both. We chose Strapi. Strapi has a self-hosting option where you can just host it on a Docker container and put it onto Azure Web Services. And we said, let's do that. And Strapi has since been the content management site we've been working with. This site is very much a work in progress. We are working very actively on this right now. And the only thing I do is make sure that they're not making the mistakes that they made on the internal site. And I put it on documentation. I'm like, do not make this mistake. Put the content outside. Avoid those re-renders. Add in caching mechanisms. All of this is available in Next.js by default. So all you need to do is actually just leverage it. I'm like, okay, let's just stick to that. There's a lot more to be done on this platform. We're still using Typeform. Typeform costs us, $900 a year. But if we can get a form system on this site, which is currently using Typeform, that's $900 saved, another $900 saved that we can put to other users. It costs the Speak Hire $1,000 to train a child. That's one more child that we can educate over the course of a year. We would take that win anytime. We don't want to pay for tech if we don't have to. And that brings me to this. Our 10th year celebration is what? On the 26th of June. We are always looking for volunteers. I am using the development of this platform as a space to bring on junior developers who are looking for their first internships, for their first roles, something to contribute to as a way of getting experience. So it's another place to contribute to if you were interested. And if you know any junior engineer who is looking for their first internship, let me know. I'll be the one mentoring them. It's all in the spirit of the fact that we run mentorship programs. So it made sense that the engineering team would also be somebody who needed mentorship. Like, okay, bringing me back to everything we talked about and a question and answer questions.
So my question for you is, after all this huge success and iterations over the years of getting to this point, what are the new and current challenges you face from a performance perspective?
You know how it's easier to climb to the top and then harder to stay there? Yeah. That's number one. Number two is that we now want to see how much further we want to push this, and every time we push this, we bring it down just a little bit more. We should probably talk about this page. This one image, I fought with the people who gave me this image because it was 32 MB. And I said, no, I am not putting that up. And it refused to load. And I'm like, why is it not loading on mobile screens? And then I looked at the page, looked at the image size, and it was 32 MB. The celebrating that they had given me to use was another 12 MB. But this, I got smart about it. I took it and ran it through an SVG converter, made the rest of the changes myself, and then re-uploaded it. So this works out. I can't do that for the photographs. I now have to work with the nonprofit team so that when they give me assets, content, articles to publish, I need to ask them to also keep in mind that A, images cannot be this heavy. We need to establish limits on what images can be put up. Strapi will accept it, unfortunately. So what I'm doing is that was one solution, but the other solution is that within Strapi, there is a plugin that will convert all images to WebP directly. So I ran that instead. So there's a plugin in our Strapi implementation so that when images are uploaded to Azure, it converts it to WebP first, creates a thumbnail version of it, creates a small image version of it, and then it pulls the relevant site depending on the screen size. So I'm like, okay. But we have to keep finding those new solutions. The moment we stop doing it, the moment we say it's not that necessary, is when we start losing performance again. Honestly, I still don't know how to fix the internal site completely. I feel like if I start to do that, I might end up recreating the whole thing, which is oddly enough, when I joined, they asked me this question, is that they asked me if I wanted to start again. And I said, no, you never start again. Because there's no point in starting again. It's better to find a way to fix what is currently broken than to start again. Because it looks like they've already tried the start again option, and that is what it led to. So, no. So, fundamentally staying where you are at and keep finding ways to keep it there.
I have a quick question. You mentioned those linting rules, right? You mentioned some documentation that you're creating. How are you planning to sustain that long term and have that basically make sure there's no fourth rewrite, fifth rewrite, and all of that, that they keep best practices throughout?
Harder question to do, mostly because it comes down to the people who you're working with. When you are new to software engineering, all of those linting rules, all of the rules that we establish for long-term sustainability feel like roadblocks. Is that I want to release this to production now, but if I have to do this, it'll take me 2 more days. At some level, it's fine. When you're doing the first version of your product, making that kind of compromise feels fine. But after you've made that compromise and after you've made that release, you should come back to it. This team was not using any kind of ticketing system. They had tried Notion, they had tried Trello, they had tried a bunch of options. I've now linked it entirely to, I can show you actually. I've now linked it entirely to GitHub projects, which has been one of my most, I've liked using this for all of my masters. So all of my projects went on GitHub projects. So you can build customizations in it. So if I build something like this, I can now build in stuff that says that you have to do it, what's priority size, what's the iteration. This was missing. This is only something that we put in 3 weeks ago. And this is now a way for us to formalize and build these processes in place. What you're asking for about the documentation, it didn't exist. All of the documents that we have on the API right now, on the API right now, these were added by me. So this is the compliances document, that you have to follow these rules. Working with trying to find a way to sustain it is also, for lack of a better word, a process of formalization. Is that if you formalize your processes, you will probably find a way to keep it going for longer. But if you try and do it ad hoc, you're going to end up with a lot more trouble than it's worth. Which is what happened to them. For, I think, the longest of times, what they lacked was a formal approach.
So I was curious, if you're, by the way, this is an amazing project and something that I wish that I had access to as a younger person. So I was just so impressed. This is so cool. I'm just curious, if you receive funding through a grant, are there any kinds of like accessibility requirements that you had to, integrate, as part of this? Did you mentioned images. Are those done through a CMS? Are they mostly just kind of, I think you mentioned that you use React. Did you have any kind of, I'm just curious what that looked like for you, integrating like accessibility into this project, because it's something that's come up for me a lot.
So we worked with this. You see alternate text, we made sure that they added that in. So like I said, the easiest accessibility requirement that you had is to do the single A standard. That's basically just alt images, H1 tags on a single image. Basic document control is all you need to maintain a single A standard. Start there. And no, the grants don't come with those kind of conditions. Okay. But we've tried to make sure that because this is a public site, we need to make sure that, some level of accessibility is good, at least when we do start to later on make those changes. It's not going to be as, as miserable an experience for the developer who has to write in those accessibility changes. And yeah, but the grants themselves, some of them have such requirements, is that you can't use them to pay engineers, you can't use them to do certain things. But the Azure grant is pretty straightforward. We are a nonprofit. They gave us a certain amount for the year, and as long as you don't exceed it, we get it for free.
Hey, so you had a lot of people earlier in their careers, just a large variety of people contributing code. How did you handle like PR review and testing to hopefully avoid how much people are breaking stuff?
So you remember, so earlier in the talk I mentioned that they had an Azure service cost that made no sense, is because to account for those junior developers, they had built in a dev QA prod system in an application that was used by nobody. So a good PR is just about doing routine checks and syntax checks, and that job is mine at the moment. Is that whoever is there to review the code at least somewhere, but that dev QA environment was overkill for a product this small. So we've gotten rid of all of that. There's no staging environments, there's nothing. I gave them a Docker Compose script that if you want to test production settings on your system, run the Docker Compose script, test it for yourself, and then tell me if it works. And I added a little check that says test it on Docker Compose. Done. And the rest is that we deploy to production, and since our user base is small, we have the ability to iterate very fast, and if they do make mistakes, reverting it back is just changing the Docker image version, and that also works out fine. And again, there are tools for all this. We can't pay for it, so we are doing it all manually. So I have to change the Docker Compose. I go into app service, I change the drop-down value. There's none of that. There are better tools for this out there in the market, but since our major constraint is price to performance, we opt for command line tools and manually managing all of this over anything else. We still don't have application monitoring. We don't do any RUM. We haven't gotten around to it. And again, because they charge you by the data, right? So per gigabyte, you'll get charged $15. I'm like, do we want to pay for that? Is there a better way? For now, what we do is that we take the Winston log, the Express app, the API generates a Winston log, and we store it in an FTP server. And if something breaks, we come to the FTP server, download the whole log, and see, oh, this broke, let's fix that. Right? It's not as intuitive, it's not as free-flowing, but it continues to function.
I just want to say that there are free real user measurement solutions that you can check out.
Okay.
We can talk about it.
Okay. I'm looking for any option that enables this system to run live. There's so much to build that I spent the last 1 year just fixing. We talked about only performance, but my major role in this team has been to do data modeling, figuring out what the API looks like, figuring out how to make sure that the databases that they had created had relationships that made sense. Because a lot of the databases that they had built had no meanings. They collected the data but didn't show it anywhere. Or if they didn't collect and they wanted to show data that wasn't collected anywhere. There was no way to compute meaning from the database, and that was primarily what I worked on for the last 9 months. Web performance just happened as a side project because I needed to make all of that work as well.
I'm glad we infected you with web performance bug.
And yes, a very, very, very big thank you to both Paul and Sergey for introducing me to the concept, and then bringing me and organizing the events, of which I've attended, I think, 4 or 5 so far?
Sorry?
I've attended about 4 or 5, I think. And I went back to Paul's blog every time I encountered a performance issue. It used to be, it still is my go-to. I have it bookmarked, like Paul's blog. I don't understand something, Paul's blog. Maybe he's written something about it. Thank you.